Hi there and welcome to the Sovereign CEO podcast. I am Caleb Jones. This is where we talk about how to create location-independent income, move to a less bad country, or at least set up an international backup plan and do all these things for very little money. I have another podcast called the Alpha Male 2.0 podcast. If you are a man, you might want to check that out. And I release that every week, just like this podcast. That is at alphamale20.com/podcast. I'm on all the usual podcast platforms. And today's topic for Sovereign CEO is one of these hybrid topics where I could easily post this topic over at my Alpha Male 2.0 channel. And because it applies to both. So after some wrestling around, like, where do I put this? Would I put it over Alpha Male 2.0 or Sovereign CEO? I realize it really belongs here in Sovereign CEO because it is absolutely a five flags international lifestyle topic, even though it talks about relationships. And that is how adopting an internationally based lifestyle, a five flags based lifestyle, will protect you financially and in other ways when you live with a romantic partner or are legally married to someone. Now, in this podcast, I'm generally going to be addressing men. If you're a woman listening to this material, it absolutely applies to you as well. However, most people who get married in the Western world tend to be over the age of 30. When you hit over the age of 30, usually the man makes a lot more money than the woman. That is just statistically the reality. Yes, when people are in their 20s, most women in their 20s who don't have kids make more than most men in their 20s. Good job, guys. Good job, millennials. Good job, Gen Z. That's great. So that is certainly true, but statistically speaking, most people in their 20s do not get married anymore. The typical man used to get married at age 23. Now the typical man gets married at around age 30. So if you're a woman listening to this, it still applies to you if for some reason you have a lot of assets or more assets than your husband or your boyfriend, or higher income than your husband or boyfriend. But with that disclaimer aside, generally I'm going to be saying guys, men, things like that, because statistically that's more likely the gender to take advantage of this material, at least this specific material. So as many of you know, I am married to the wonderful Pink Firefly, and I live a five flags lifestyle. I live abroad. I do not live in the Western world. I do not live in the United States. I live in Dubai. Almost all of my assets are non-American assets. They are not in any American company or any American bank. They are all either stateless assets, which would be things like cryptocurrency and precious metals, or they're assets located outside the United States and in many cases outside the Western world. And so on top of that, and I talk more about this on my Alpha Male 2.0 channel, and this particular aspect is outside the scope of this podcast, I have prenuptial paperwork with my wife. It's a stack of papers about this high, about 27 pages long, where if I get divorced, God forbid, and I don't want to divorce Pink Firefly, I love her to death, I would like to be married to her for the rest of my life if I can do it. But if that were to happen, I would not lose a single penny of my money, even if I lived in the United States. Now, if for some reason she went to challenge that in court, I've done a lot of things to make sure that would be virtually impossible. But even in a 2% rule, bizarro world where she was able to actually challenge the paperwork, the United States government, the United States courts would have a very difficult time, pretty much impossible, trying to get any money out of me because it would not be located in the United States. And that's reason number one that having a five flags international lifestyle will assist you in these things, is that the assets you have abroad are outside of the reach of your home country where your marriage or cohabitation agreement or whatever is legal. So let's say you are, let's say you live in the UK. You're legally married to a UK citizen. You're a UK citizen. You move to, you move to Colombia with your wife, and you have all of your assets outside of the UK, all right? Especially outside the Western world. You own rental real estate, maybe in Southeast Asia. You've got maybe gold coins in, Singapore or something like that. And your wonderful UK wife divorces you, and she goes after you in court, and the court says, pay up. What the hell is your UK court or UK government going to do in terms of confiscating your real estate in Thailand, or your gold bars or gold coins in Hong Kong? How is that going to work? The answer is they can't. So it is a level of asset protection that you have that you do not have if you live in your current collapsing Western nation. You can also do things like international trusts and protect your assets that way. That gets very complex beyond the scope of this particular podcast. But if you have more money, there are all kinds of legal ways in which you can protect your assets, offshore assets, where they are protected against things like divorce or palimony or things like that, back child support, things of that nature. So there are lots of ways to protect yourself that way when you adopt a 5 flags lifestyle. As I've said many times, when you have 100% of all your assets in the current collapsing Western country in which you live, you are now 100% reliant upon that country to behave nicely to you for the rest of your life and never have any problems with that country ever. Is that smart in the current collapsing Western civilization in which we live? No. Is it smart in the current left-wing environment in which we live, which is going to get worse and worse over time, no matter who you vote for, Trump supporters? No, it is not. This is a terrible, terrible idea. Now, if you have no assets, those of you who are just totally poor and have no money, do whatever you want. But you guys who have some assets, pay attention to this. This will help you. The next aspect in which this can help you is that things like alimony, communal property, child support, and let's go through these one at a time. Let's go through this real quick. Those of you not familiar with Alpha Male 2.0 content. Alimony means you break up with a woman or divorce a woman and you have to pay her money, not your kids, her. You have to pay her money every month, and if you don't, you go to prison, especially if you live in the United States or Canada, and you will go to jail if you don't pay this, okay? It's because of what she's used to. Isn't that nice? Very fair system. So that's alimony. Communal property is a fancy way of saying she gets half. So whatever your net worth is, you get divorced, you slice that in half, she gets half, you get half. So if you have $10 million when you get married and she has $400 and you get married, you now have $1,400,000. 5 years from now, you get divorced, you got to pay her half that money. Yes, isn't that nice? Very fair system. Child support, you know what child support means. If you father a kid, you got to pay her money to help support the child. For the record, I've said this many times over my Alpha Male 2.0 content, I am completely opposed to the concept of alimony. I am completely opposed to the concept of communal property. I do agree with child support. I have 2 kids myself. I paid my child support when I got divorced. So I agree with child support. I don't like how it's handled and managed, but I do agree with the concept. Just to be clear on that, I'm not against child support. I am for child support. If you father children, you need to support your kids. Sorry, it's the way it goes. But here's the deal. Under a 5 flags lifestyle, most countries in the world, and this surprises a lot of Westerners, people who live in the United States, Canada, and Western Europe, they're always surprised when I say this, but it's true. The vast majority of the countries in the world either do not have alimony or communal property laws, or they have them written down, but like I've talked about in a recent YouTube video, they don't enforce them. There's no enforcement whatsoever. You go to South America and you get divorced in South America, Paraguay, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, and even if there are communal property or alimony laws in these countries, they're not enforced. You just don't pay them and you are fine. No one cares. The government does not care. The government doesn't have the resources to care. So you are protected in that respect as well. Many of these countries don't even enforce child support, which I think is kind of sad, but they don't. And I personally know several men, I disagree with them doing this. I think they're monsters. But I know several guys who will go to these like third world, second world emerging market countries, and they'll go and pregnant a bunch of women, and they just come back to the United States or come back to the UK or back to Australia, and they're scot-free because there's no child support laws, there's none of that stuff there, and they just leave these women with these kids. So don't do that, please. That's horrible. I'm just giving you the examples of these laws either don't exist in many countries or are not enforced. So you are much safer living with a woman, and that would mean girlfriend you live with or wife who you marry, when you're operating under a non-Western environment than you are in a Western country. And let me again state for the record, if you live in the United States or Canada in particular, and you get divorced, you don't need to get divorced. If you live with a woman long enough and it's common law marriage, there's palimony laws where you got to pay palimony, which is like alimony, okay? If you get stuck with these, you got to pay her half, or they find you're hiding money or any of that stuff, and you don't pay it, you'll go to jail. I have spoken with men who are actually in jail for not paying their alimony. Happens, Canada and the United States. Isn't that nice? Wonderful. Why would anyone want to live in the collapsing United States or Canada? Why would you do that? I don't understand, you guys. I just don't get it. So that is the opposite of most countries in the world. Most countries in the world, they consider this your personal business, which it is, and they fucking stay out of it in terms of the government. They stay out of it. Even again, and I recently did a YouTube video. I don't know if it's up by the time you hear this podcast or watch this podcast, but I just did an entire YouTube video on just because a law is written down somewhere does not mean it's actually enforced. That is certainly true in many Southeast Asian and more so in South American countries. So it's another way in which you have a layer of protection when you adopt a 5 flags lifestyle. All these, you have all these red pill guys say, don't get married, don't get married. So These are men who live in the United States or Canada and plan on staying in the collapsing United States or cuckoo Canada for the rest of their lives, which they shouldn't do that. If you're total five flags, you can do whatever you want. You can marry women and you can live with women and it's totally fine. You're totally protected. It's kind of nice, assuming this is something you want to do. Next aspect, and this gets very complicated, and I am not an attorney. I can't answer detailed questions about this, but I can bring this up at least. In many countries, your marriage, your Western marriage, may not even be legally recognized. So if you get legally married in the United States and you move to, I don't know, you move to Peru and you get divorced in Peru, there's nothing the government of Peru is going to do about it. It's not a Peruvian marriage. So they don't fucking care. Your wife, your lovely ex-wife who now hates you, would fly back to the United States and try to get you in court in the United States. And again, if all of your assets were outside the United States, good luck her getting anything. So you have another layer of protection in that your marriage may not be legally recognized in the country in which you live. Certainly if it's a Western marriage, you live outside the Western world. There are some accommodations that Western countries make for each other. I believe that if you are married in the United States and you and your wife move to the UK or Australia, there are ways you can certify the marriage document and things like that for the country and make it somewhat official. But if you move outside the Western world, which is what you should do if you take my advice, this isn't a big deal. So again, you can do all kinds of fun stuff when you adopt the five flags international lifestyle that are not possible when you decide to stay in the collapsing USA or cuckoo Canada or suicidal Europe or authoritarian Australia or any of these places. Now, just to be clear, to round out this podcast, am I saying that if you're an American, go out right now and legally marry your girlfriend because you plan on leaving the Western world in a few years? Please don't do that. No, I'm not giving you permission to do something stupid. I'm saying if you are strategic and careful and emotionally controlled and follow the correct procedures, you can really protect your assets, even in terms of breakups and divorces and child custody battles and things of that nature, when you have a location-independent, five flags, international lifestyle. It is yet another benefit to you as a citizen of the world when you adopt a five flags lifestyle. Asset protection, which, by the way, is a benefit of five flags I don't talk enough about. And the reason I don't, frankly, is most people in my audience don't have a lot of money. So it's not like it matters to you. If you have, a net worth of $22,000, asset protection is really not really big on your radar. I know there's a big percentage of you, though, who do have assets. And this is why I'm doing this podcast for you guys. And certainly if you don't have a lot of assets right now, I hope you will someday. Build your Alpha 2.0 location-independent business, make that cash, get those assets, and then protect them using asset protection features of a five flags lifestyle. Very cool. Cool. All right. See you next podcast. Have fun. Bye.